Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Pest and Disease session, first session of Saturday morning at NOFA. Hopefully everybody's as awake as I am. My name is Crystal Stewart. I work with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program, and we actually have 3 panelists joining us. Seth will be popping in shortly, so I'll introduce the other 2 panelists that are here. To my left is Sue Decker from Blue Star Farm, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her operation shortly. And then further to my left is Amy Ivey, also with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program. She's a vegetable specialist located up in Plattsburgh, and she specializes in high tunnel production and growing things in the amazingly cold north. So the way that today is going to work is we're going to start off with some introductions of the farm, just to give you a sense of the farms that we're drawing experience from today. But then I'm going to pause and actually ask the audience what diseases you're really interested in hearing about. We prepared a lot more material for today and pictures than we actually need to use. So we're going to require you assisting us in figuring out what to talk about and what to let go of. So we'll take some time for that, and then we'll head into the presentation with some nice pictures of diseases and the experiences of these lovely farmers. So I'm going to hand it off to Sue to talk about her farm, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Crystal. I'm going to stand over here, I think. So just to give you a little bit of background about our farm and, give you kind of a snapshot. We've been in production for 8 years. We have 2 locations. We have a home farm, which is on a heavy clay soil. We have about 1 acre in cultivation there. It's more geared towards perennials, so we do garlic and strawberries there, and then we have our high tunnels there, and that's really the best use of that ground that we have there. And then we have a rental acreage, which is 5 miles away in Kinderhook, and we farm 5 acres there on a sandy silt loam. These are a few of the shots from around our farm. This is in Kinderhook, and this is early spring of this past season. And we're getting our tunnels ready. We do some caterpillar tunnels for tomatoes, and we have our solanaceous crops in that field there, and that's early on in the season too. That's a few years ago. That's our crop of kale. We do a lot of kale. And then this is this is actually solanaceous from a previous year too. We started out and didn't have a lot of cultivating equipment, so we do a lot of mulching to actually add organic matter to our soils and to also prevent weed pressure. And then this is Slack Hollow Farm. This is Seth. So I'll let Seth introduce all of his farm here, and I'll hand it over.
Hi, I'm Seth Jacobs, Slack Hollow Farm.
That's your pointer on the right.
Which moves the slides?
The right is advancing.
Okay. A very brief introduction, under 2 minutes to our farm. So we have we're an upland farm. We're about 15 acres of mixed vegetables, and we're a market farm. We grow for two wholesale accounts to stores. It's considered direct to retail, and 1 big farmer's market, and that's pretty much our markets right there. So we're not a big wholesale operation. We pretty much know where everything's going when we plant it, and that's what we mean by market farming. So just to give you an idea of our scale, we put out planting a lettuce looks like that every week, and we run 3 tractors going on 4, a bunch of high tunnels, 4 high tunnels. 2 of them are minimally heated, and 2 of them are not heated at all. So on the right is our winter, middle of winter. That's what it looks like right now, winter growing in our tunnels, and the same tunnel in the summer is growing tomatoes. There's our crew, and this is, I try and keep in mind all the time, this is the real goal of the farm, is to be in the community and employ people, and so all my farming decisions are about making sure the farm is running profitably, so these people have something to do that will earn them a living, and that's kind of the basis of all my decision making. As far as pests, I'm not a great speaker on pest control because, if I had inherited like my neighbor John Hand, a melon farm, then I would know everything there was to know about melons, because I was going to grow melons come hell or high water. But being a small market grower, I kind of take the easy way out, and if I have a lot of pest problems with a crop, then I tend to find a way not to have to grow that crop, and so a lot of my pest control is just avoidance, and I don't grow the problematic crops, or we grow them at a different time. For example, we've been growing chard year round, but we're really good at growing chard in these high tunnels in the off season. And so we've been getting incredible leaf miner problems, which would involve an amazing spray program to deal with. So we just decided we're going to grow chard when we're good at it, and we don't grow chard during the season when everybody else has chard. So our chard has grown through the winter and really heavily grown in the spring, because the tunnels produce chard like crazy in late February, March, April, early May, and then we just quit and leave it to the other growers. So that's just kind of an overview of our farm. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to spend a fair amount of time sitting down together so that we can pass the microphone back and forth. Amy, did you want to say anything about yourself?
Hi, I'm Amy Ivy. I work on Crystal's team. Because I work in high tunnels, there are kind of different problems that happen sometimes in the tunnel than you see out in the field. But I don't have all the answers, certainly. It's fun to see what's going on. The one thing I would encourage you all to do is at least identify what your problem is, rather than just kind of look the other way. Even if you can't solve the problem, just knowing what it is can really help a lot.
Yeah, just so you know, when somebody calls us and says that they have the blight, our eye immediately starts to twitch, because we're like, what? So yeah, that ID thing is really important. So the other thing about Amy that's really exciting is that she really, really loves insects. She loves finding ways to control them on farms, and she also just loves them. So we'll get to hear a different perspective on insects, which is really nice. And as you've heard, we've got two growers here that are using cultural practices really effectively to deal with disease control. So I'm really excited about that. Seth says that he doesn't have too much to say about disease control, but in reality, both of these farmers are doing a great job of managing disease, not just by killing diseases when they show up, but by avoiding them. So we'll make sure we get that in there as we're going. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a second to figure out what you want to talk about, but I realize it's early. And if your brains are like mine, they're still kind of in diesel engine mode where they're like, maybe I'm going to go, I don't know. So what I'd like for everybody to do is to actually just talk to a couple of the people around you for a minute or two to get your brain going, because oftentimes I find that when I go to a session, I have a really great question right out after I walk out the door and start talking to somebody about what I just heard. So maybe you can try doing that now, and then after that brief period, I'll ask you what it is that you'd like to hear about, and we'll make sure we get to those topics first. And then we have a whole list of schmutz that we can look at after that. So go ahead and chat with each other for a minute, and then we'll come right back. All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call everybody back. And just a reminder from Amy, this is insects and diseases. So, what do you want to make sure we talk about today? Flea beetle.
Tomato blight.
tomato blight. All right, we'll talk about the various tomato blights. We'll tease that. We'll unpack that. Yeah, right.
I would like to hear about downy mildew and cucurbits.
Downy mildew.
Especially cucumbers.
Okay. We don't have answers. Yeah, right. Some things are going to be sad. Scott.
Mexican bean beetles.
Mexican bean beetles. All right, I'm going to try to look to the back of the room because I know I'm avoiding it, and then I'll sweep back all the way in the back.
Cabbage whites.
Cabbage whites?
White cabbage.
Cabbage moths, yeah. Okay, all right, Amy, it's all insects. They brought the insects. All right, I'll swing this way and then swing that way, so all the way in the back. Squash bug. That was right. We'll do all the insects that exist. Yes.
Any experience with beneficial nematodes for beetles?
Beneficial nematodes. Sue has some bad nematodes. That's what she just said. Okay. Did you have a specific
I actually hate Japanese beetles. I
For-
have problems with them.
Japanese beetle? Okay. Yes.
Cucurbit yellow vine and potato leafhopper.
Cucurbit yellow vine?
Yeah.
Is that a virus? You can tell we're going to be very expert on this. That we might not know. And what was your second one?
Potato leafhopper.
Oh, potato leafhopper.
No, it's not the vine borer. It's a different disease.
It's a disease. Okay.
It's spread by squash bugs. It's not something.
Erwinia,
Oh, an Erwinia. Okay.
right?
I don't know if it's an Erwinia or not.
Well, we're clearly not an expert panel on that particular one. Yeah.
Corn seed maggot?
Oh, yeah. Seed, corn, maggot. So, and I'm going to expand that to include onion maggot. Yes, I just gave a sideways glance to Seth. Okay, and then we're not going to be able to get to all these, by the way. But we're going to make a real effort. We'll start at the front and loop back.
Tomato leaf molds and leaf miners.
All right, tomato leaf mold.
I thought I'd go for both of those.
All right.
Chard and spinach.
Yeah, so we have leaf miners in chards and beets, spinach, and tomato leaf mold or brown leaf mold. Good, yeah. And then, yeah.
Surface spore. Also, if any of you have any experience with beneficials, like implementing that.
All right, Cercospora and beneficials. I'm going to put that up with the nematodes. Yep. Yeah.
Allium leaf miner.
Oh, allium leaf miner. Amy. Amy. All right, we'll take one more. Yes.
In Vermont, we have sweet midge and leek moth, which is really changing the face of agriculture, organic ag.
What county are you in?
Chittenden. It's sweet midge is people can't.
I was gonna say, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so we have
Grasses.
sweet midge and leek moth added. Yes.
Pepper maggot.
Pepper maggot. The dread pepper maggot. All right. Okay, so this is a very long list of things. We will do our best. And I'm going to tell you that we're really going to rely on the farmer knowledge as much as we can. So what I'm going to do as I look at this list is I'm going to prioritize the things that our farmers have had direct experience with first, and then we'll go through the ones that we maybe don't have as much experience with after that. Okay.
One little intro thing as we attack all these problems here, I just want to put in a big plug for the importance of identifying so you know what you've got, and then learning the life cycle, because there's so many strategies you can employ once you know the life cycle. Does it have multiple generations a year? Is it just one generation a year? It'll help you timing with hand picking or timing of planting and stuff like that. So that's probably one of the number one steps, it's step number one in dealing with any of these problems.
Absolutely. All right. So we have a few things in here that didn't get mentioned. Is it okay if I just pop right through those? So we didn't talk about any of the diseases of spinach, but if you want to know about them, we have experts.
You just put in for spinach downy mildew, if any of you do have it, if you'd let your extension people know, we're trying to figure out where it's showing up around the state. So just let us know when you find it.
Yeah. All right. So how many of you are familiar with leaf miner? Never seen it. All right. Well, Seth at least has. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience with it, and then Amy can maybe talk a little bit about control.
I don't have any answers.
You don't have anything on control? No.
Great.
Oh, not much to say. Everybody's seen it, and it gets on spinach, gets on chard. What else? What other crops is it on? Beets, right? Beets. We find it can make the greens ugly, but generally doesn't affect production, so we don't sweat it. You can't have ugly leaves if you're marketing something like chard, which is leaves. And as I say, we looked at what our options for controlling it with organic chemicals, and it, the amount of spray, the way you have to get the spray under the leaves, and we just decided not to mess with it. Yeah.
I could say something about it, actually. Okay, a couple of things. If you look in that chard leaf on the right, and these are both from Seth's high tunnel there, can you see the larvae in there? So if you ever are in there and you're seeing them, just smush them for one thing. So if you're going down the row, maybe doing some harvesting, go ahead and smush those. That'll help some but they have multiple generations, so that's one of these ones. When you read about it, they say the earlier generations are the worst, and then it peters out. But you really struggled with it. And then I planted some spinach in the fall at our research farm where there hasn't been any of that group, and within like a week, our spinach looked like that. Even the seedlings in the seed tray got the leaf miner. So it's a little gnat that flies around, and that's why it's so hard to control, because it flies. And if you were to put something like Surround on so that the fly wouldn't be tempted to lay its egg there, that's the part you're eating. So it's not, really an option. So unfortunately, you could put a row cover, but the minute you sow it, or the minute you get it out there, you need to put the row cover down, as we saw in our seedling trays, that got infested. So that's about all I have to say. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that one.
Do you have anything different?
I don't really have anything else to add.
Yeah.
It's like exclusion.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Let's see what's next. Oh, yeah. Any questions about that before we move on? Oh, yeah. Hey.
I just want to say possibly if it's in its gnat stage and flying around, you might be able to sticky trap. And you can get yellow or blue sticky traps depending on the type. Put them along your row on a bamboo stake up high. They won't get on the crop. You'll probably catch a good amount of the adults flying around.
That was great feedback. And I should say, anytime anybody else has a piece of feedback that's going to benefit everybody, please do speak up. We are not going to assume that all of the knowledge lives up here. So,
I think you need to repeat that for this.
yeah. So what was just shared is that another way to partially control this pest is to use yellow sticky traps. And you can capture a lot of the adults flying around. So, as with many of these pests, it's an integrated approach. You have to take multiple angles, and that's a really good one. Thank you. Yeah. Yes?
Do you have any data on trap cropping with either velvet leaf, lamb's quarter?
Oh, data on trap cropping?
I don't have any data on it. I've seen trap cropping research for flea beetle, and there's some really good resources out there. UNH has done some work, and some humane folks have done some work. So if you Google that, there is quite a formula about it, a ratio of how many rows you need per, of trap crop to rows of your desirable crop and stuff. So I would look it up, because they have diagrams and all that kind of stuff. It's an interesting process. Definitely could help.
Nice.
I don't know of it for leaf miner, though.
Yeah. All right. So the next thing that we just happened to have organized for you, which was on the list, is talking about beneficials. So we can talk about beneficial nematodes, and we can also talk about our grower experience with beneficial insects. Are you using any beneficial insects, Seth?
Just ladybugs for aphids.
Ladybugs for aphids, yeah.
In the houses.
Yeah, and Sue's, okay, yeah, and Sue's done a fair amount of experimentation over the years, so I'll let you
Yeah, I think the most that we've done as far as beneficials are concerned is in our high tunnels, where we often have an aphid problem in the early spring. It seems to coincide very regularly, so we keep scouting for aphids earlier and earlier and try to do our releases more often. So aphid, we're mostly using them for aphids, and ladybugs are really beneficial for that. And we've also released the parasitic wasp, the Aphidius colmani. And I have noticed that the Aphidius colmani will overwinter in your houses too. You can tell the difference on, if you look at the eggs on the underside of the leaves, you'll see that the eggs are a little bit shiny, and that's when they, they're in a kind of a mummy stage where the fly has actually infected the egg. So that's a nice thing to just kind of try and propagate in your houses if you have that problem. We've also released lacewings during the summer months. They work better when it's a warmer environment. And that we've only done that once or twice. So I think it's working, but you'd have to do it more often, I think, to really verify something that's going on. We will, all of these beneficials work best if you're scouting early. If you wait till you have an epidemic, it's not going to be as helpful to release beneficials at that point in time. It'll still work, but you may not overcome the problem that you need to overcome in the time that you want to do it, just with beneficials. I mean, that's been my experience. I don't know if you can speak to that, Seth.
Well, yeah, with something like ladybugs, the adults don't eat that many aphids, so you need a lot of adult ladybugs to deal with any level of aphid infestation, whereas the larvae eat hundreds and hundreds of. So, but when you release these ladybugs in the early spring in your houses, you're not getting larvae because they're not reproducing yet. So, yeah, you need these things. Just reinforcing what Sue's saying. The predators have to be established, and introducing them during an infestation is only partly effective. Yeah.
And I'm going to pass it to Amy for the nematode question. But are these questions about beneficial insects first? All right, let's catch these two questions first.
How often do you release them prematurely, or preemptively rather?
So how often do you release beneficials?
We do them often weekly. Okay, yeah. And we get our ladybugs either from IPM New York or Arbico is another one. Sometimes IPM New York doesn't have them when I need them. So there is multiple places that you can purchase them.
Are you doing that preemptively or once you're in some sort of infestation?
We usually scout to see if there's one or two. If there's one or two or anywhere in our house, we start releasing them right away.
Yeah, Brian.
I guess my question, I'm glad you mentioned the supplier, and if there's any other good suppliers, that'd be good to share that. And also, how does it work in terms of scouting and then getting a supply and then releasing them? How does the timing work there? It seems like you might be really, by the time you see something, it might be too late to kind of order it and get something. I don't know.
So there's two questions here. Are there other suppliers, and how does that work with the timing and making sure you're on top of the wave rather than underneath it?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. I think as we have had experience over the last 2 years, we've started to try to release them earlier and earlier. And I think actually it's probably a good idea if you know that you have a consistent problem that's been demonstrated at least 2 years in a row, to actually release them before you actually see a problem, to start to really build up any kind of population that you can so that they're there when the aphids are undoubtedly going to show up. I don't know if you have any other suppliers, Seth? No. Okay, so.
Yeah, anybody out in the group using a beneficial insect supplier that they really like?
Yeah, what's the one in Michigan?
Is that Coppert? Yeah. Yeah, Coppert in Michigan's another option. BioLine. I've never heard of BioLine. Where's BioLine?
Not sure. We get our Chimeras and Aureus from them.
Oh, okay. So BioLine's another option. Cool. All right, I'm going to have Amy talk about the beneficial nematode work.
And I just wanted to, I hope you don't mind, Sue, the wasp lays its egg actually in the aphid itself. And so what you find is the mummified aphid, and so the wasp lays its egg, and in the process of the development of the larvae of the wasp, it kills the aphid. So that's a good way to know if you've got the wasp, though, because they stick to the leaves, so it's not the greatest for leafy green control, because you have these mummies stuck all over your leaves, but it's a good way to know that you've got them. And then one last thing, if you release a predator without any prey, they get, you need to have something there for them to eat, or they won't stick around. And then one of my growers who does a lot of transplant production got the ladybugs and kept them in the refrigerator and was able to sprinkle them out over a little bit each week, the supplier, and I think it's IP. Yeah, so that way, in terms of the supply and getting it there in time, you can stretch out your supply for a while, make it last a little longer. So just a couple of tips there to help, yeah. But yeah, the nematodes can be good. You got to get the nematodes. They attack the larvae, the grubs of the Japanese beetle. So you have to have them meet. The problem is Japanese beetles lay their eggs in turf, and the grubs eat the roots of grass. So if you put nematodes in your high tunnel to try to control, or in your bean field to try to control the Japanese beetles, it won't do anything because so you got to figure out where the larvae are. So it's tough to control adults with nematodes. It's very effective to control the larvae with the nematodes. So for the larval pests, the root-feeding weevils and things like that, black vine weevil, things like that, we've had some good success with. And we're doing our colleagues are doing some work for wireworm control in the Hudson Valley, and they're looking at some of these beneficial nematodes for wireworms, and even for plum curculio, if anybody's growing any fruit trees. They're looking at it. We don't have definitive answers on that yet.
Stay tuned. All right. I think, yeah. So we're going to move into a slew of different tomato things. And we have a few just interesting things to show you that weren't on the list, but which I think are useful, even if you haven't encountered these problems. So we'll go through those slides really quickly. And then we'll also add into this some discussion about those tomato blights. So we'll unpack how many different blights there are, what they look like, where they come from, and what you can do about it. So we'll go into a little tomato block here. And these are Sue's tomatoes.
All right. So this is something we noticed this past season. Our tomatoes were growing, and as they were growing, we were starting to see them have wilty tops. And so my first inclination is, okay, they're not getting enough water, or there's a nitrogen problem, either too much or too little. And they were really green and robust on the bottoms, but they tended to have these kind of wilty tops. So we checked the roots, and the roots were not normal. They had these galls that had formed on them, so indicating that there was a root knot nematode. And we had, this happened in our tunnel. We had, in the previous 2 years, pulled our tomato plants out after production was completely finished, and we noticed that this rooting problem was happening mostly on our cherry tomatoes, not so much on our red tomatoes. And production was not impacted, so I didn't really think anything about it. But this year, it did have an impact. End of July, this is what the front of our greenhouse looked like. The plants are completely done, and we had to pull them early. All that production was lost. This is the back of that greenhouse. It's not a great picture, but you can see that the plants look a lot healthier. They're not great, but indicating to me that they're not great movers through the soil, but that they're there and having some damaging effects. Now, we did send soil and a sample of the root off to get it tested to confirm that it was root knot nematode. The sample came back and said that we did have root knot nematode, but that the numbers were not present in quantity to actually have an impact on our crop. So that wasn't really true. So you kind of have to, do your own research with that a little bit too. We had root knot nematode in the other tunnel as well. And we can tell that by, we pulled the roots again at the end. This is some of the ones that were really affected. It does seem to favor, they do seem to favor cherry tomatoes. The one curious thing that we did notice is that the variety Sakura had absolutely no galls at all on the roots. And again, in our other house that we had pulled these at the end of the season, production was not impacted at all. So they're there, and what we can do about this, I'm not exactly sure. The thing that we did to address it at the end of the season when we pulled our tomato plants was we grew a cover crop of yellow mustard in there, and then that was kind of a 4-week, 5-week open period so that we could biofumigate. So at knee height, we were able to till that crop into the soil, and then we laid old green plastic on top of that so that we kept what other fumes we could at that point and solarize whatever can solarize in the month of September. Jury is out as far as what that has had as far as an impact, and I haven't really made a decision yet. The options open to us going forward would be to graft to varieties that would be resistant to the root knot nematode, and maybe add healthy nematodes that would combat it. I'm not sure about that. Okay. Or having attended some of the other workshops at NOFA, maybe put that house into a cover crop and let it just have a cover crop on it for the season. So yeah, in the back.
Is there any research on steaming the soil?
I think that's another option. The question was whether there's any research as far as steaming the soil. And I think that there's some validity to that too. You just have to find that machine. Or solarize, yeah.
The Arnolds have one.
Yeah. I may be borrowing it.
Worked in their tunnels, not so much outside.
Yeah, and this is all damage that we've seen in our tunnels too. So we don't see this outside.
I wonder how deep down does that go though? How deep are the nematodes?
I'm not certain about that. Maybe Amy?
I know with the beneficial nematodes, each species has a zone they like, very specific, like 1 to 2 inches, 2 to 6 inches. So I don't know if the root knot, seeing where they are in the, kind of makes me think it's somewhere in there, but I'm not totally sure. They're very, very specific, and so that's one thing about the beneficial nematodes. You've got to make sure you're matching it upright, and if you are going to use it for Japanese beetles, there's some species that are better on that. And not on others, so you can't just throw anything down there.
Do you mind if I steal for a second? So one thing to think about, let's say you were steaming or solarizing, what you might think of that as is cleaning the root zone. So chances are, with some of these nematodes and other issues, you're not going to be completely eliminating the problem, but you're suppressing that issue in the root zone so that the plant can grow during that season, and it's part of a management technique that's more maintenance rather than solution. So, maybe consider it in that light instead of as, a fix.
I will say that we also had this nematode problem with cucumbers in the same house. So.
We've had root knot nematode on ruin a parsnip crop. Is there different species? Is this the same nematode?
The question was if it's the same species of root knot nematode for parsnips versus what we've seen here for tomatoes.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah, and I think that there are different species that are causing those two different, and there's certainly multiple pathogenic nematodes. Yeah.
Are you going to try graft into that Sakura or the maybe a cherry?
That's a good question. Well, Sakura is a cherry tomato plant. I guess you could use it as a rootstock since it's sown resistant. It's been a long time since I've grafted, so I'm not sure if I'm going to take that or hope that our brassica. If I do graft, I would do a control group of no grafting too. Yeah, but we might try it with actually a select few. That would be a good trial, actually.
Yeah, so the discussion that's happening up here is about biofumigants, mustard cover crops being used for nematode suppression. Yeah, and they're using Caliente and some of those other really hot mustards, and trying to use those to suppress nematodes. It's very tricky if you want to go that route. You know, you have to make the cover crop into really small pieces, fully incorporate it, and then ideally seal the soil so that you're trapping those gases and allowing them to work. So it's not a simple thing to do this. It's not like I plant mustards and then, you know, my problems go away. It's a real intensive management tool. But yeah, it's inconclusive at the moment, but it does show promise. So we'll keep chipping away at that. Yeah. I don't remember oh yeah. So another thing that was on the list was brown leaf mold, or do we not call it fulvia? The name keeps changing.
You can call it, as long as people know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and actually Amy has seen more fulvia than any other person I know. So I'll start with you and then hand it this way. How's that?
And I can keep it brief. Basically, once you have it, it's in your tunnel, and really the only thing to do is to plant resistant varieties. There's no point in spraying for it. It sporulates on the underside of the leaf, so getting that coverage is really challenging. So that's really the deal. We do have a good fact sheet. If you Google Cornell high tunnels, all of our high tunnel fact sheets are there, and there's some really good information for all kinds of different problems. And there's a nice one there on leaf mold, so you can check that out.
What are your favorite resistant varieties?
Oh, my favorite resistant varieties. I'm a big fan of Big Dina these days for a slicer. Geronimo is kind of the old standby, but it's kind of flavorless, and it's a beautiful round ball, so you know, a lot of your customers will like the look of it. Rebelski has a little bit of a ribbed shape to it. Not everybody likes that shape. And then for cherry tomatoes, get it big time. Like Sun Gold is very susceptible, unfortunately, to it. So Sakura is a wonderful one. Esterina is a yellow one that's resistant. And new varieties come out every year. Just make sure you read the description so that it does say that it's leaf mold resistant. Yeah.
I was just wondering, are there any heirloom varieties that have shown any resistance at all?
No, there are no heirloom varieties that show resistance, unfortunately. And Big Beef is a good canary in the coal mine variety to use. It is very susceptible. And a lot of people grow. Big Beef is wonderful until it gets leaf mold. So, yeah.
Did you guys do test tunnels with white reflecting reman underneath it?
White reflectant for like mulch. It wouldn't affect the leaf mold sporulation.
Sunlight in dark years reflects up to the bottom of the leaf.
So the light would reflect up off the white?
Yeah, instead of light soaking into the black, it reflects off the white.
Yeah, once these tunnels are, full, there's not that much light penetration down to the ground, so I'm not sure how it would impact any reflection. I haven't heard that reflection would, maybe it will, I don't know. I just haven't heard that it would help with leaf mold.
I've never experienced that. We, plant into white,
So you haven't had leaf mold? Yeah, a lot of people haven't had leaf mold yet. Someday leaf mold will come to a high tunnel near you. And so enjoy it until it does, and then one year it's going to find you, and then you're going to have it. You still get a crop. It's not devastating, but it definitely reduces the yield. Yeah?
Have you tried using compost teas to combat tomato disease?
No, I haven't tried using compost teas to combat the leaf mold. It's pretty aggressive, and as I say, the sporulation's on the underside of the leaf, so actually good coverage is probably one of the bigger challenges for anything you use. You could use copper, that would be the other organic product, but again, that coverage is really, really challenging to accomplish.
What do you do to manage it once you have it? Like, how do you not vector it, or do you not have to worry about it, or harvest the stuff that doesn't have it first, or what?
Pardon me? Yeah, okay, so he's asking, how do you manage it once you get it to reduce the spread? Certainly, that the year you find it, that you would want to, because you carry it on your clothes, so you would want to go into all the clean sections of your house first and then harvest the infested part last. Be careful, in my job, if I've been to a farm that has leaf mold, I won't go to another high tunnel that day until I've had a chance to change my clothes. Tell your workers about that too, and that's kind of how once you get it, you have it, because you're not changing your clothes, so and your workers aren't, so it does spread pretty quickly around the farm. Yep.
Is it overwintering on my callousing equipment?
Yeah, I've had people move their tunnels, and it still comes with the structure. Yeah, unfortunately, it's just there. It's every.
Would help to sanitize all those.
I don't know that it'd make a difference. You could try. It's never a bad idea, especially if you had any of the bacterial diseases, to do that anyway. So it can't ever hurt, but I can't guarantee it would be worth it. It's pretty pernicious once it's there. Okay.
So that question was about sanitization.
Oh, excuse me, I forgot. Sorry.
So you know, we'll go backwards from there.
Sorry.
And I forget which disease. Oh, whoops. Then there's that. I'll let Sue just mention what happened here.
Well, this seems to happen to us once a year. We use timers to do our irrigation, and my fault. I knew this timer might be on the way out, and I let my husband kind of take over at that point, and he didn't double check to take the hydrant off. So we had irrigation on for probably 18 hours, and the back of the house was completely flooded. And we ended up roguing out, I'd say maybe 15, 20 plants after this was all said and done, and just kept an eye on everything else and to see if it came back. And indeed, this is what they look like at the end of August. They grew through all of that despite our neglect. But it happens, so make sure you have good timers if you're using timers, and make sure you double check that the hydrant and that timer actually are working properly. That's never happened to you, Seth, right?
It has.
We do not speak of it. Yeah, these things happen. All right. Oh, that's just a nice picture of the root knot nematode. So we're going to move, all of the disease issues that we've been talking about with tomatoes so far are really tunnel-centric, but I'd like to step into the discussion about all of those other tomato diseases that happen out in the field. So when we talk about blights, when people say they have a blight, let's see, it's happening. The three things that usually come to mind for us are going to be early blight, late blight, and septorial leaf spot, right? So we can talk briefly about those. The big important thing with those diseases is knowing the difference and knowing where they're coming from and knowing when you need to be worried and when you don't need to be worried. So we can talk about that. But before we do that, I wanted to touch on bacterial diseases of tomatoes. How many of you have thought about bacterial disease management with tomato crops? Okay, I'm glad that we're going to talk about this. So we just had a session at Expo with Chris Smart, who's a really great plant pathologist at Cornell, and I think the way she put it was that this is the largest challenge that's showing up, that's increasing in vegetable production across the board, is bacterial diseases. And I personally feel like that's very true with tomatoes as well. I don't know how you feel about it. Yeah. But the increase that we're seeing in bacterial diseases is really scary. And it's scary for a couple of reasons. One is that these diseases can come in on the seed, so you can actually import them on seed. The other is that, like the leaf mold, they're incredibly persistent on all of your stakes and your equipment. They'll live in the soil. They don't freeze basically ever. They're actually stored in the pathology lab at like minus 200 and some odd degrees.
Crazy temperature. Yeah.
So these are things that once you have them, you're not going to be able to get rid of them. Then you move into management mode, which is really hard. So what I really wanted to talk to you about is how to avoid getting these problems in the first place, and how to know if you do have these problems so that you can try to reduce the spread from place to place, right? So has anybody seen spots forming on your tomatoes and didn't know what was causing that? Yeah, yep. So if you're seeing kind of raised lesions on the tomatoes and you're seeing little halos on those, there's a pretty good likelihood that that's one of the bacterial diseases. There's actually 3. And then another symptom just to be on the lookout for is this browning on the veins of the leaf. This is bacterial canker. or sorry, edges of the leaf. I speak English. On the edges of the leaf. And the reason that this is happening is that the bacterial canker is actually kind of clogging up the plant. So the water isn't moving through the veins as well as it would be, right? So this is a systemic disease. Once you have it in a plant, you can't do anything because it's inside, right? So the goal here is really to avoid having it and to stop the spread. Now, when we talk about control for this particular thing, organic and conventional growers are on level playing field. The only control for bacterial diseases on a chemical level is copper, so organically approved products. And what I was really interested in at Expo was that the biological controls with a copper program are really about as effective as you can get. So using Actinovate, using some of these new bacillus products along with copper is really effective. And I didn't know that the biologicals were having activity with these bacterial diseases. So that was pretty cool.
As effective as the conventional.
Yeah, as effective as anything conventional. So for once, organic growers are right there in line.
Can you go into how it is applied, the Actinovate, and you talked about double nickel for the bacillus?
Yeah, double nickel was actually on there. And actually what I'm going to do so that we get through enough of this stuff is I'm going to direct you to our website, and there's a report about all of the products that were used.
And how it was applied?
I think how it was applied is in there. And honestly, I don't know how she applied it, so I don't want to speak out of school. I'm guessing that it was a foliar application because she was doing a weekly rotation. So I think it was copper 1 week and then a biological 1 week.
And I don't think you said that this is canker.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so the pictures that I have here, there's 3 bacterial diseases to be worried about. There's bacterial speck, because pathologists are really good at naming things. So bacterial speck makes specks. Bacterial spot makes yes, it makes spots. And then bacterial canker actually does have some cankers that form on the stems, and it causes these marginal burns and these larger raised lesions on the fruit. So all 3 of these diseases are treated exactly the same. They look a little bit different. But the one thing that I want to talk about for prevention is hot water seed treatment. How many of you are hot water treating your seeds now? Yeah, this is impact. So not too many of you. I'm going to ask you guys, why do you do it, and how easy is it?
Well, we do it religiously for spinach, and it's not hard. We do a pre-soak at a certain temperature, and then you need a very precise unit to do your actual hot water bath treatment. And each seed has a different temperature, each seed has a different length of time that it needs to be in the hot water bath. I generally do my preheat just in a stock pot with a thermometer in it so that I know exactly what temperature. You have to be using very precise thermometers to know what your temperature range is. And then Cornell, actually, I borrow a unit from Cornell to do the hot water bath treatment. The units themselves, if you do a lot of this, range in the $500 range. So if you think that that's going to be, pay off over time, it's probably a good investment to make.
We treat tomatoes. We have done some spinach, and cilantro is a big crop for us. We plant cilantro every week, and we treat all our cilantro seed. Yeah.
And so just to give you mechanics, and then I'll get to the...
For bacteria?
So yeah, that's what I want to touch on. So when we're talking about hot water seed treatment, it works on bacterial diseases, it works on alternaria, basically any fungus or bacteria that tends to either adhere to the outside of the seed or live in the seed surface. What you're trying to do with hot water seed treatment is you're trying to heat up all of the seed except for the embryo to the point where you're killing off the bad things, but you're maintaining the embryo's life, right? So this is why it's such a narrow range, because you're cooking it until you're not cooking it, right? So that's what we're really going for. And it will kill fungi and bacteria when you do that. Yeah.
I know that some seed companies do that already. Are you at all concerned about recommending hot water treatment of seeds that have already been hot water treated and then killing the seed?
That is a really good question. So the question's about seed companies that are already hot water seed treating, and what would happen if you do that again. And I'm actually going to let you talk about that, and then you can talk about the sous vide.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so if they've already been treated once, every time you treat, it does reduce the germination, so you don't want to do it twice. So check with your supplier to make sure. They usually will tell you because I kind of, because it's something, it's like a service they offer, but check to make sure. And then also one just last thing to also treat for on all the brassicas. It would be really smart to treat your brassicas for black rot. Is there a question about this before I go on, Leanne?
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of my seeds from Osborne Seed out in Oregon, and they're like a black rot free zone. And I've had like multiple conversations with our seed supplier, and they do not recommend hot water seed treating. And we get black rot all the time. So I don't know. There's just something really funny going on with seed companies, and half the time they don't really know, I think.
Yeah. So the comment is about the areas that don't have black rot and seed companies that supply and have it and don't have it. It is a vague area. So it's not a guarantee you won't have a problem. It's one step that you can take to try to do that. So. And another thing to keep in mind, if you are treating maybe to control something like Cercospora, it is on the lamb's quarter weeds that's right next to your field, and it also overwinters around the edge of your field. So putting in a clean seedling doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get the disease, but it just kind of gives you a head start, a foot in the door. So one neat thing about the device that I'm really excited to try this year, and if you know what a sous vide cooking is, where you raise the water temperature, and there's a unit that actually has a thermostat on it and a little fan that moves the water around to keep it in an even temperature. That could be a really great way to do it. I've been reading about that. I want to try that. I want to get those, because then you can use them the rest of the year for cooking, because it's a great way to cook, especially any of the grass-fed meat. It doesn't, you can't overcook it. You can't make it tough with a sous vide. So anyway, I want to look into that as a unit. One other thing too, a lot of people ask, do you have to plant the seed right away? And you can, if you're not going to plant the seed right away, then just dry it down quickly so that it doesn't start to sprout. So spread it out, dry it down. Some people I think even use like a food hydrator, dehydrator, I mean. Yeah.
With no heat, though.
With no heat, yeah, because you don't want to impair the germination, but you do want to get it dry down right away so it doesn't start to grow if you're not going to use it right away, right? Were there some other questions or comments in the back?
Just if you want the sous vide, I think one of the best models is the Joule, Joule.
Okay,
It's
cool.
pretty cheap. It's like $200.
Yeah, I was looking online for them, and they really aren't too bad. And you need two of them because you do want to warm it up to like the pre-temperature, because it's very precise and it's hard to maintain it at exactly. And we're talking 122 degrees, not 125 or 120. I mean, it's really precise. So be careful at home. Don't try this at home because you don't want to kill your, you don't want to overdo it and kill your seeds. Yes.
Yeah, just that Jan said that Bayo does hot water treat all their brassicas. So if he claims that if you know that your seed is coming from Bejo, then it is hot water treated. So that's just in response to Leon. I don't know if you talked with Jan or.
That's good to know. I'll talk to them.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, so different seed companies, and so Bayo Seeds says they hot water treat, and they even have a steam treatment system too. High Mowing has been doing a lot of that as well, but just check with your suppliers for each particular seed so that you know if it's been treated before. Yes?
How does soaking with hydrogen peroxide compare to hot water bath?
I am not familiar with that process. Are any of you familiar?
No, the question was about soaking seed with hydrogen peroxide instead of doing another treatment. Anybody have any experience with that?
We do that for our microgreens.
You soak your microgreen seeds in. And I'm, off the cuff, I would say that it would sterilize the immediate surface of the seed. But anything that goes into the seed coat or below the seed coat wouldn't be affected. So it'll do something, but it won't do everything. Yeah. There was one way at the back. Is there still a hand up, or has that moment passed? Okay.
What was the Cercospora you mentioned?
Oh, Cercospora. Or Receptoria. Are we still on tomatoes?
I was talking about this.
Oh, yeah. Here.
You can talk about it if you want. Okay, Cercospora, that makes that black spot that you all know and love on your, it gets, especially on beets. It makes those black spots on the beets. And it's not really a huge issue for the beet itself, but for those of you who want to sell your beets bunched, it makes them look pretty unattractive. So a lot of people will talk about seed treating for Cercospora, and it's just, it can help, but it really isn't gonna, it's not a surefire thing just because Cercospora is all around.
So that brings us to kind of a nice segue, which is you need to know where your diseases are coming from, right? So if you are dealing with a bacterial disease, or you're not dealing with one yet, knowing that that comes in on the seed is super important. But when we look at some of these other diseases on tomatoes, they're coming from a lot of different places. So where does early blight come from? The soil, right? Yep, that's everywhere, everywhere. It comes out of these little cracks in the pits of hell. No, no, it's definitely, you know, omnipresent in the soil, and it overwinters, right? Really important to know that. So by contrast, where does late blight come from? The air, right? And it comes in every year, right? So when we think about, you know, rotation, early blight is something that can be reduced through rotation. You can not build it up in the soil by not planting tomatoes in the same spot. But with late blight, rotation actually doesn't help you, right? So what helps you with late blight? Don't get it. Prayers, you know. Anybody got anything magical?
Keep the leaves dry. Yeah. Low humidity.
Yep. So this is where Seth's cultural controls are spot on.
So we used to manage our tomato tunnels. They're fairly automated with automatic roll-ups, and our tomato house has a ridge vent. But we used to manage for temperature to try and get earliest possible tomatoes. But we now manage for ventilation. So you know, it's the difference between having your roll-ups come up at say 65 versus or 70 versus 55. So we'll take a few days less on the tomato season, but we manage we manage the house for ventilation so that the leaf surfaces stay dry as much as possible. The HAF fans are always on, and when you don't, without a moist leaf surface to attach to, you can avoid it. You can slow down or prevent some of these things.
The other nice thing about tunnel production, of course, is that if you are using copper, you can keep the copper on those leaves, right? So all you have to worry about as far as coverage goes is making sure that you're keeping up with the new growth, which is where the late blight would show up, right? So when we see failures in tunnels and people have been spraying copper, usually it's because the plant has outgrown the copper, and that's where the late blight shows up. So.
One more plug. So one more thing about late blight. If any of you grow potatoes, it will overwinter. It only can survive the winter in a living tissue. And so your cull pile, the pile where you threw all the half-dead, infested potatoes potentially, those potatoes will survive most winters, and the late blight spores will then come from that pile and go blow back onto your farm. So do be super careful about that. If you ever have late blight, first of all, identify it, make sure. You can send us photographs. Late blight we could usually tell just by looking at a photograph. And we're all happy, all of Extension is happy to receive your photographs. So do that and make sure. And then by all means, don't let those potatoes get through the winter.
That's a really good point, that it's important to remember that if you don't know what something is, you can always use the smartphone to contact an extension agent. We love having pictures texted to us. So, you know, make sure you use that resource. I'll give you Amy's phone number, and and you can all text her. It'll be great. Yeah.
Do you intentionally ventilate your tomatoes when it's colder outside throughout the course of the day, so in the morning, so you minimize the humidity buildup within them?
Questions about ventilation of tomatoes.
The question is, do we ventilate deliberately early in the morning? Well, I would say yes. I mean, it's all based on temperature. So the curtains are set to open at a certain temperature. So I think we keep it down to 55 or so. so that things open first thing in the morning when the sun first hits the house, or they might not even close at night. So it's not so much time as temperature determined.
Down or on the way up?
Trying to get what?
The temperature, so you're letting in, so if you have a high temperature during the day, and that drops, and you have more moisture on leaves.
So he's asking about when you get condensation, when the difference between warm air outside, cold air inside, warm air outside. Yeah, it's not. Again, we don't have humidity. We don't have automatic humidity controls where you could run it that way. We just have fans and open and shut, and we just run the houses a little cooler, and the tomatoes are 2 or 3 days later than they would have otherwise been. But it has definitely made a big difference in how much of these molds we get. Yeah. But as far as the leaf mold that we were looking at earlier, I mean, that just rules, and that just determines what varieties we grow. There's no preventing that. You know. But as far as late blight, the blight prevention, I haven't sprayed copper in 5 or 6 years even. I haven't. Yeah.
Nice. All right. So I think we're gonna move off of tomatoes because we actually only have a few minutes left. Time flies when you're talking about pests and diseases. So we're gonna try to combine discussion about 2 of the pests that came up, flea beetles and potato leafhopper. So how many of you got hammered by potato leafhopper this year? Yeah, I mean, we were seeing damage on crops that I've never seen potato leafhopper eat. So they were out and hungry. So these are Sue's pictures. So I'll let you talk about this first, and then we'll take turns.
Sure. This is fast becoming one of our top pests on our farm. The yellowing edges of the leaves is hopper burn, and we see it on everything. They love beans and they love potatoes. Those are their first choice. We're surrounded by hay fields. Once they cut the hay fields the first time around, those bugs don't have anything else to eat, so they come over and they inundate us. And to the point where in 2016, where everything was really heavy bug and insect pressure, we pretty much almost lost our potato crop. We only got small potatoes, and some of the potatoes never even made potatoes in the ground. So I was bound and determined to have a potato crop this year. And we see it on all of our solanaceous. We actually grow jicama too, and I could not figure out for a long time why, we were seeing these yellow edges. We thought it was water, we thought it was nitrogen. It's leafhopper. These bugs go through, maybe Amy, you can extrapolate on this, but I think like 7 molts, many molts. So they're around. This year, we were really good about going out into our potato field and scouting, just like going through, looking at the underside of the leaves, going through and swiping our hand through the plants just to see if, they were flying off of there. And we used Pyganic and alternated with Azim Max every 2 weeks based on weather. And we also used a sticker stylet oil with that. Very successful over a 6-week period, mostly through the bloom stage of the potatoes. And we're spraying very, very late in the evening so that they're kind of settled on the leaves, and we're also avoiding any beneficials that might be hanging out in there. I mean, almost to the point of, okay, I've got to turn the headlights on for the last pass here. And it made a huge difference for us. It was a good potato year for us. We're on a sandy silt loam soil, so all the water that we got, the potatoes actually really loved, and our soil could take that kind of volume of water. So this was the Lerat fingerlings for us that we grew for the first time. We started with 25 pounds, and we got a 22-to-1 ratio, which totally unheard of for me. Usually I'm really delighted if it's like 9-to-1. So I did not see our crew cut these seed potatoes up. We had 25 pounds, and it stretched for a 280-foot row and then wrapped around to like another 50-foot. And I thought, oh my goodness, we're not going to have any potatoes because they're cut into like little tiny pieces. But it was fine, and definitely spraying for these had a significant impact on our yields overall for all of our potatoes. Do you want to add anything to that? Okay.
Can you share the rates and at what pressure you were spraying?
Rates. I'd have to look it up, but we did not go in lightly. You know, we didn't really mess around because we have a really heavy population, and it wouldn't make sense to kind of do the lighter one first. But I can look that up and provide that at some point. Maximum label rate, probably, yeah, is what we did. And our sprayer is an OESCO sprayer. That's a PTO mounted sprayer with a gun on a hose. I love that sprayer. I mean, it's really, really good coverage. It does have sides that if you have a smaller crop, you can go over it with the spray mounted nozzles, but we generally use the handheld mounts for that because we get really good coverage. We can go in there and get the underside of those leaves really well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, because I think that's really the key, is that sometimes the regular nozzles just don't get the material.
Yeah, I mean, we've done backpack sprayers and things like that, but it doesn't do the trick. You really need to get in there with a high pressure and get undersides of the leaves. Mm-hmm.
So just a quick follow-up on that. Are you getting off the tractor, or are you just like spraying from the tractor seat, but just still able to get underneath the...
We do. The question is whether I'm getting off the tractor and spraying or whether I'm spraying from the tractor. And for the most part, I am spraying from the tractor. The interior rows, I can't quite get the coverage that I want. So I will have to actually go get off the tractor and take the hose out into the middle of the row and then kind of work myself back on that. Yes.
We had leaf hoppers back for the first time last year, and we had one variety, one crazy fingerling called Papacacio that seemed to have some resistance. Are there any other?
We grow Papacancho too. Yeah. So the question is if there's any other varieties that have resistance to leafhopper. I haven't noticed any varieties that have resistance. I have noticed varieties that are more susceptible. We do not grow red Norland anymore, just because they love it. And it just doesn't make sense to try with that. I don't know if you can add to that, Amy, for...
I had a similar question from a grower, so I asked my colleagues, and we didn't come up with anything really specific. In general, the white varieties seem to be less susceptible. Nothing is totally resistant, though, but side by side. Yeah, has anybody else had luck? In general, we're feeling like the red ones are the troublesome ones. Yeah, Ken.
I'm a seed potato grower.
You would know.
Most of your fingerlings have somewhat of a resistance. Papacacio has more than most anything else I've seen.
Okay, hang on one second, Ken, I'll tell him that part. So Ken is saying that the seed potatoes in general have more resistant. Excuse me, fingerlings, sorry, Ken. Fingerlings, yes, and carry on.
No, just fingerlings in general have more of a resistance than anything else.
But how about of the regular ones? Have you seen a difference between the white and the red?
I haven't noticed the difference between white, reds, blues, or yellows.
Okay, and Ken is saying he hasn't seen, and he's a seed potato grower up in my neck of the woods, and hasn't seen any difference between the colors in their resistance. And he, oh yes, and that.
Yeah, dark red Norlands will go down like a bag of rocks. And the pockets come in.
So dark red Norlands are the.
Get out there with your sweet net and get them early.
Okay. Okay, so dark red Norlands are really the most susceptible.
Cuca Gold is somewhat tolerant.
Cuca Gold is somewhat tolerant.
Yeah, it will stay a week to 10 days longer than most of the other varieties.
A week to 10 days longer.
And Lehigh is pretty well staying. Do you agree with that as a seed potato grower?
I haven't seen any difference other than the fingerlings.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah. And I've been out with growers, and the hard part, can you go back to that slide with the burn on it? And a lot of times when I'm out visiting growers, they'll see that little bit of burn, like on the cucumbers. Imagine that was a potato leaf. And I'll say, you've got leafhoppers, now's the time to spray. And it's hard to believe that at that stage you really need to bother. And they tend to want to wait. And if you can get out there earlier, wouldn't you say, Sue? This is not one you want to look the other way about if you care. And it really, with that much damage on a potato, you are already affecting yield. It's hard to believe that. And a couple quick tricks on looking for them. To look for the adults, if you just walk through and I kind of brush the leaves as I walk by, the adults will fly up. And they're white and they fly around. They're pretty easy to see. And then to get the nymph stage, you do have to go in and turn that leaf over. And they're pretty small, but they run, and they run sideways, which is really cool. So that's a good diagnostic for them. Bugs are the greatest. I really am fascinated. Anyway, and then the white thing, aphids do this as well. They leave the shed skins behind, and sometimes that'll help you see them if they've already flown the coop.
Well, believe it or not, we made it through, I think, a third of the list, and we're out of time. So clearly we need to have a longer pest and disease session. I really wish that we could have gotten to all of these. But I want to take a second to thank our panel. You guys were great. And one quick announcement, there is a cancellation which is listed up at the front desk, but I just want to let everybody know, in case you were going to the How Plants Work session, these guys are not all picking up and moving to the How Plants Work session. It was actually supposed to be a different panel who wasn't listed. So that workshop actually got canceled. We'll reschedule it for next year because I'm actually very excited about that workshop. But we're going to look to have Craig Holdridge and Claudia Knob-Vispo as the speakers in that next year. So stay tuned. And these guys are free to move to their next session. Seth is going to be joining Brian Caldwell in another session up next. And we're going to head into break. So if you guys have any remaining questions that you want to come see us about, please feel free to. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll see you out there.